Alright, so this video is going to be a basic overview of installing a first TPI onto a carbureted vehicle. We will be using the Fast 2.0 system, but we won't talk too much about that so much as we will be on installing the first TPI itself. We will be doing a GM Corvette, Trans Am install video on those for those who need to see how that's done as well. Okay, we're going to start this disassembly so we can install first fuel injection system on this awesome 77 Monza. Basically, you want to drain the fluids right away. Make sure you disconnect the battery. Mark your spark plug wires firing order so you don't get twisted around about that when you go putting it back together. Set it to top dead center. See the picture I posted, and we're going to go from there. Basically start taking it apart. Okay, we are back on the 1977 Monza project, and I wanted to take a minute to talk about fitting of the base. You want to check the pre-fit of this while it's dry. No silicone. You can see I put tape on the edges to hold the gaskets in place so we can be sure it's the right height. When we cast the base manifolds, we cast them in a 1204 port, which is small, so we can actually CNC the port out and grow it all the way up to a Vortec head, like this height on this particular head, which allows us to use one casting for all different head sizes. The problem with that is there's a lot of extra material on top of the port. So if you have a small port head and there's a big ridge here on a lot of heads, it may not fall down inside of that ridge. So we have to machine that off. That's why it's important that we know what type of head you're using this on so we can have that set for you. It's also important to know that because if you buy a used one or one off of eBay, it may not work. You want to pay particular attention, like I said, to these ridges because some of them are really down close to the port. That edge has to come off. The other thing you want to look for is your oil pressure sending unit fittings as well. Obviously, you're going to have to make like a 90 or a 45 to get it away from the manifold because our runner kind of kicks over that and blocks it. You want to determine that now before you put the base on, because once the base is on, it's really difficult to get to. So you have a couple different versions. You have like this big version with a nipple that goes in it, or you can get one that's already has the nipple part of it and it's a small 90, and you can see it's much smaller. You can use the big ones. Sometimes you can't position them where you need to go because they're so big and it'll hit the base manifold, but you can grind these little edges down, which will help you fit it. But just for purposes of showing you that the large ones will work, I'm going to just loosely put it in here and dry fit the base with it. That way you can see that, yeah, you can still use the big ones if you have it in your possession. It's just that it's a little easier to use the small one. Gives you a lot more room. So we're going to put our sending unit on here so we know it's pointing where it wants to go or where we want it to go, and then we'll fit the base. Basically, I'm just going to gently set this down here. Make sure it sits down in the valley nice. Check hole locations, which they are totally fine. You can see that it's back far enough to fit all the bolts. Everything lines up, so we can confirm that this base will fit, and you can see there's a plenty of room up here on top to clear this ridge. But you definitely want to make sure you check that before you go and put silicone on it and then try to plant this down and then figure out, oh yeah, I forgot I got to get that fitting in there for the oil pressure, because you can see how this kind of goes over it and blocks it. Before we button up the top half, of course, we're going to mount our fuel rails and our fuel lines in our system so we can actually pressurize it before we put the plenum and runners on. That way we can check for leaks and the fuel rails are totally accessible, and it's not a pain taking it all back apart to fix a leak that we could have caught now. So that's another helpful tip there for you. So hopefully this little clip helps you kind of look for some stuff that you may not have thought about doing right off to the get-go. Okay, so we're back on the Monza project, and I wanted to touch on the fuel system install real quick. You can see that we have the base mounted. I have all the bolts in it. It's all mounted down. That's pretty self-explanatory. I'm pretty sure everybody knows how to put a base manifold on. Torque specs, 25 pounds. Work your way out from the center in a circular motion, cross those corners. When you tighten them, you can see the pictures that we added to show you the sequence and the torque spec. Fuel rails are already mounted. You can see that I have the injectors in. I made this nice little crossover steel line, which just consists of some fittings that go to inverted flare, 3/8 MPT. So that's what these are here. We can use a steel line with inverted flare. Simple bend, really easy to do. Not too much involved with it to convert it over. You can use a basic flare tool and a tubing bender to do that. Basically looks like this. You can make a couple little bends. You can get these Imperials. This is a Cornwell. You can use an Imperial. I actually got a few of these around, but they do good. I also made a pre-made line, steel line. See if we can get this in video for you. You can see I made a few bends. This line will be going right here to this fitting right here. Now when I did this line, I obviously measured it with, like, what's really easy to use is a piece of wire, like a regular old piece of copper wire. You can see you can kind of bend it around real easy. You can use this to mock up your bends, your lengths, so forth. Comes in handy. Also, you want to make sure you check for clearance with your distributor. Hold down. I actually put the distributor in with the cap just so you can make sure that it does clear all that. Really easy to double check that now before you get too far into custom bends and are not able to basically just put that in until it drops down. Take your distributor cap, put it on so you can check your clearances, which you can see we have plenty of clearance here. Not to worry about that. We're also going to mount our coil here, so I made sure that I had clearance for that. I'm going to mount this with some little brackets that I have made. Just a basic 90-degree bracket that'll mount to here with some thick plate that'll slide up in here, bolt through those holes there, and mount to here. We'll get into that more when we do the electrical side. But in reality, we're going to go MPT hardline here. We just don't mount it rigid to the firewall, so we have a little bit of engine flex for the line. Then we're going to obviously come through the rail to our crossover, and this can be done back to front, either way you choose. I'm going out to a 6AN fitting because we got a fast fuel pressure regulator that has these AN ports. You can use an aeromotive style that has 3/8 MPT, which I do often as well. But you basically, you know, a couple 6AN fittings here. This is a barb because it's a return. So on the return side, you can see it says return here. On the return side, you don't need to have, you need to have fuel injected rated hose, but it's not high pressure, so you can get away with a clamped barb or what have you. It's not really under that much pressure because it's returning. As you can see, it doesn't take too many fittings. You know, 1, 2, 3 ANs, 6 ANs, and then a barb, a plug, of course. Fast includes this. You do need to get a good quality fuel pressure gauge. Other than that, you have to build a, in this case I pre-built a little hose that goes from the rail here so I pre-mocked all this up before, obviously, because you want to kind of think this through before you go into any kind of lockdown with your system. We're going to mount this fast regulator right up here to the firewall. I'll kind of knock it up here for you so you can see how I did it. It's going to go here. And then this line will connect. To it, like so. Should get it all kind of loosely in place. Now obviously you want to go back, make sure you tighten everything up. That will complete the high pressure side in through the steel, through the AN hosing, steel braided, into the regulator, out with the hose barb to the return side. And you can pretty much do this any way you want. There's a lot of options. You can use MPT like I did. You could use all AN fittings. Basically, there's a whole bunch of different fittings, MPTs. This is a coupler for connecting the steel feed line. So when you're making the line back, if you don't have a continuous run, you can connect them to that. You can use standard brass straight barbs. All that's available, pretty simple, through your local parts store. So that shouldn't be hard to come by. Like I said, bending the hoses is pretty simple. There's not a lot to that. Creating the steel lines, that's not so bad either. Just like I said, just make sure you put your cap in place like I got here, so you can see you got plenty of clearance here, plenty of clearance here. Everything's out of the way, so you won't have no problems there. Fuel injectors, we'll touch on them a little bit. You can see this is a style that you normally would have, you know, on a basic 85 to 92 TPI, thicker body Bosch. You can use the thinner stuff, it's not a problem. Make sure the O-ring height's the same, diameter is the same, but they work just the same as long as all that's there. I have this particular style in. When you install these, you just basically put a little bit of a lube on the O-ring, I like to use WD-40, just slick them up a little bit, pop them into place, pop them onto the rail, mount the rail down. In this case, you know, I would mount one side, I leave this loose so I can pivot it up out of the way, and then drop this down on top of this side together, you know, as a plan to keep it all in uniform. Makes it easier to go on. You know, check the rotation of the injectors. They should spin. Some are going to be harder than others because, you know, O-ring sizes vary and things like that. Nothing to be worried about. They should be fine either way. You just want to make sure that they're, you know, in there properly, and you lube them up so you don't rip the O-ring when you're installing them. Other than that, you want to make all your connections, fire up the fuel pump, pressurize everything just like it sits now so you can check for leaks anywhere. Injector leaks, hose lines, fuel pressure regulator leaks, any kind of fitting leaks. Do that now before you put this up. You can definitely use a runner as well to check clearance, which that way you know you're not going to be, you know, hitting your fuel pressure regulator or anything like that. Another good thing to do is mount this before you put the top on. Get this one started, all 3 bolts in the bottom. That way you can get to this inside one here easier than if it was all put together with the plenum in your way and you were trying to put this up. It's like if you started over here with the runners and everything, this cross bolt inside there, it can be tricky. So you want to make sure you look into that before you go too far, because otherwise you kind of box yourself into a little bit of a corner. Which I will get this runner together here. What I like to do is take the runner, and see I kind of set the gasket on it, put the bolt through it, hold the gasket, take my 3/16 wobble, bring the runner into place. Try to get things started outside of it. Sometimes if you can't get that bottom bolt started relatively easy, you can start with this corner. That way it'll kind of help you hold the gasket in place. And I just use the Allen wrench to start it. My hands are kind of fat. I can't get into these little areas so well. Should come over to this side. Come across. Make sure you got the gasket set so you can run that in by hand. I like to snug it up so there's just a little bit of movement still, but not tight all the way until you get it all put together. Otherwise it'll fight you. Just slide that one right down in there. With this being a little loose, you can actually wiggle it around a little bit. Again, you don't want to go too tight with this stuff until it's all together, but at least if you get all the bolts started, you know, you can move this around when you're lining up the plenum, as I'll show you when we get into the electrical side here. But other than that, you get that, you know, start it there, and sometimes these wobbles like to give you some guff getting them out because they kind of wedge in there goofy, but you know, take your time, be patient, it works out well. But other than that, as long as you do all your double checking before you build the top half, make sure there's no leaks, you're good to go. And like I said, bending these steel lines really is not that difficult. Just take your time, mock it up, like I said, with a little piece of wire. Get your measurements right. Get yourself a good piece of equipment to bend them. Those benders are like 40, 50 bucks somewhere online. I'm sure you can get them maybe cheaper, more if you buy them off a tool truck, but you don't necessarily need to do that. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and obviously finish the bottom. We'll run back to the tank with the feed line. We have this fast fuel pressure sensor that has to go in line, which will go back by the tank. We got a Russell fuel filter that goes to there, and we will make our connections. We have an in-tank pump on this particular vehicle, so we'll just be making a connection from that to this with AN, as you can see, and then out to AN, and adapt that to our steel line. So we'll have steel all the way up, except for the tank little section will be braided, then it'll be steel all the way to the engine. I like to have as much steel line as possible on the high pressure side. So yeah, hopefully that helps you kind of figure out what to do and what not to do with fuel systems. We'll pick up where we do the electrical next. I will run the harness, get all these sensors plugged in. A lot of this stuff will mount the sensors on the bench. I'll show you that when we put it together, and then we'll just have our harness run up through the center here and make our connections to our fuel injectors and our throttle body sensors, and our manifold air temp sense is going to be right here. So I just wanted to jump on this electrical real quick and kind of show you guys what I got going on here. I ran all the harness in between the fuel rails. You can see everything's clearly marked by fast. You know, map, air temp, idle control motor, throttle body, which is your TPS. Injector harnesses can go on either side as long as you keep the 4 together per loom. There's no specific side, so you can take these 4 and put them over here, and those 4 and put them over here, whatever you choose to do. It'll work either way. The important thing is to try to, like I have everything mounted like where the air temp's going to go on the plenum. Map sensor is going to go here. All the forward mounted stuff is already in. I put the coolant sensor in. Harness is right here. I don't know how well you can see it or not, but it's already installed. Plugs in here. Yes, the thermostat will fit. Some guys, I painted this red so you can see it. Some guys call up and say it don't fit, but they don't twist it. There's like an open spot here. It'll fit right in there. Bam. There you go with that. So this is hooked up. Snaps in, no problem. All the injectors are plugged in. Everything's good. I'm going to run a grommet right to the back here. You can see I just kind of took the one that Fast gave me. I split it so I could wrap it around the wiring when I'm done, because I have to tuck the distributor wire in there because I have all the main harness inside the car, because there's a lot of room in there to mount it all up inside the car instead of having it all hanging out here. It gets really, really hectic with all them wiring here. I have the pressure for the fuel sender they give you for the sensor, fuel pressure sensor. I run that right along this fuel line that you can see. I run it with it all the way to the back. The O2 sensor plug harness comes out. I just tuck that down, bell housing to the O2 sensor. That's pretty much it for the harness up here. I'm going to mount the coil on these 2 little tabs here. Basically, Fast wants this grounded, so these metal tabs are mounted right to the intake, and then it just slides on this and goes all the way down. Bam, nice and tight, snug fit. I'll put their mounting bolts through. It'll sandwich these metal tabs, which will in turn ground that. Call that a day. The distributor drops in at 30 degrees on this system. The Sportsman is a little different. I guess you can go 50 degrees. Just make sure you got your gasket on there. This tight, drop down. You want to point this, here let me show you. I marked it number 1. You want to point the rotor to number 1, and you want to put the balancer to 30 on top dead center, 30 degrees, which I have a picture that I will post with it to show you what I mean by that. So once you get that down, your distributor's in. I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna tuck this up in the firewall, back inside the car, plug into the main harness. We're all good there. My CDI box is gonna go over there. I have to make a bracket for it yet, and I'll route all that stuff over to here and continue on with, you know, routing the ignition components at that point. But we'll do another video on that when I get closer to that. It's just important to get all this run. I like to wire tie this to the fuel rail boss. Keep this away from this bolt. This particular vehicle does not have a EGR crossover. It's a Vortec head, so it's blocked off so heat doesn't get up there from the exhaust, but older engines will still have this crossover active unless you put the plug in there with the gasket kit. It will get this bolt hot, so you want to keep this harness away. So what I do is I run everything over there. I do a little zip tie, tie it off to there, and then that protects it from you know, falling over to here and melting through if this gets extremely hot. Other than that, that's pretty much a quick review of the wiring. I will do another video as I build the rest of this for you guys, and we'll go from there. When I put the plenum and all that stuff on, I'll show you how I plug everything up. And yeah, so that's just an update on the electrical. Okay, now we're going to put the top half of this together. I bypassed the fuel pump, ran power to it, pressure tested all this to make sure it doesn't leak. You don't want to bolt all this stuff up. If it's going to leak on you, you have to take it all back apart. So be 100% sure you check that first. You know, pressure it up like I did. I just ran power to the fuel pump power just with a jump box, fired up the pressure, and then let it go. And made sure there was no leaks. So we're all good there. Now we're going to go ahead and start putting the runners in. Plenum on. And try to go to the next step for you. I said I like to try to put my gasket on the runner. I use this T-handle one to just get things going. I'll come back and I'll recheck all that with my torque. I'll show you that as we go further in. Try to this into place a little bit. Sometimes I like to start on the bottom bolt. I don't know, it's just a habit. Kind of get it going. Works for me. Once you get the center one going, typically the outer ones are okay. You just double check your gasket, make sure you're good. The one up by the rail on the top one, I always put the washer up to the front of the bolt so it clears the fuel rail because it's tight up in there. And it's just important to know that you have to basically leave all these loose. Don't tighten any of them 100% until you get them all bolted together. Just that way you have a little bit of a wiggle room with them. And that way you have some play. These long wobble head tools are just awesome for this design. Not the easiest to manage, but with the tools, it works. This is the socket right here, the long socket that you would used to torque these to 75 to 80 inch-pounds. I use this one. This is just my breakaway wrench for when I'm doing rear end work and stuff like that. You can get the digital ones, of course. It's inch-pounds, 75 inch-pounds on the runner bolts. We're going to take our plenum, which you can see I have pre-run items. It's important to hook the hose up to the map sensor. Believe it or not, there are guys that don't realize that you need to hook up a hose to that. This is very important information to the computer. So you got to make sure there is a hose. I make it as short as possible. I like to try to keep it within 12 inches. If you don't want to mount it to the side of the plenum and you mount it up here or something, just keep it close. I've mounted that bracket and everything. This is a stainless steel bracket. It can be polished up to shine if you really wanted to, with some compound relatively easy. Our laser guys just give us the mill finish. They can't really guarantee polished stainless steel bright, but it is stainless steel. It's not a raw steel bracket. I also put our air temp sensor in. You can kind of see, hopefully, that it's got the perforated holes in it. That's the air temp sensor. The coolant one would just have a brass. So then you just plug that in, bring this down into place, and you're going to just, like I said, as habit, I start at the back. Do it in any order you want. Just get it loosely fit. Make sure you get the gasket up into place. You can look this up. I like to try to get all three of these in before I move to the next one, just so I don't forget a bolt. Like I said, you just take your time. It's tedious, but it's done relatively simple. Some people hurry up and they cross thread these bolts, and then the next thing you know, they can't get them back out. Once you gall stainless into anything, it's pretty much impossible. You have to kind of work it back in and out. Maybe a little WD-40 on it to try to stop it from ruining the threads completely in the plenum or base. But you have patience and that won't happen, and you'll be good to go. You should have no problems whatsoever, as long as you take your time and, like I said, just leave everything loose so you can kind of wiggle things around. That's a big help. Don't forget to take any of the towels you have, plug in the intake holes. That would be a bad scenario to leave those in. I would suggest you plug in them if you're going to leave it at any amount of time open, just to be safe. Got to make sure you have it on the right one, because each runner has a specific spot. Yeah, and as you noticed, I had the left rear one on there. You want to kind of try to get that mounted up like I touched on before, just because it's easier to get to when the distributor's out. You can see I have a pre-taped bottom. This bolt down here goes into the coolant passage, so it definitely needs to have Teflon tape put on it. Otherwise, it could possibly leak coolant out of there. This one here with the throttle body off is pretty accessible. Switch over to the socket one. This guy, because I can't spin the T-handle because it hits the valve cover, but the socket will work just the same. Get it up there, get it loose. Loosely hanging on there, and to the next gasket. And just make sure you pay attention to that gasket. You don't want to drop that down. It causes quite a bit of a grief session. Go back after things once you button it up for vacuum leaks, so you want to keep that down to a minimum. Again, it's just a matter of taking your time, making sure the gasket doesn't fall on you, making sure that you hand thread all the bolts before you really get them tight, because you could cross thread them, and there again, like I said, the galling is just something you want to stay away from. Just make sure you leave these loose enough to try to you can really actually just use your fingers to follow that down with the ridge of this, and it'll guide you right into that lower hole in the center. You know, valve covers off, it's a lot easier for people that way, but yeah, it's not necessary. As you can see, you can do it with them on. There you go. Basically, that's it. Like I said, I'll run around, I'll put my socket on, I'll snug these all up with the torque wrench. I mean, you can pretty much do them hand tight as well. That'll be more than sufficient, but if you definitely want to torque them, it's a good practice as well. Basically, run around and make sure you get all of them tight and torqued properly, and that'll ensure a great install. No vacuum leaks. Like I said, with this one, seal it. Call it a day. Once this is done, obviously we're going to put the throttle body on, which that's pretty simple, pretty basic, 4 bolts. But we'll do that one on a separate video just so I can touch base with you guys on the bracketry, properly setting up the throttle position sensor and all of that. Just because there's questions on that stuff, I'm sure. So we'll just pay attention to that and concentrate on the throttle cable bracket setup and throttle body on its own video. That way, you know, we get a little more in depth with it and a little more detailed. Again, you just come back and set this. I have it set to about 80. And this little yellow arrow will just come over and touch off on that blue. Well, that's when you know you got it. Right about there. And basically, that's what you do. Torque them all in. Like I said, you can get these in a digital form. I just use this needle one because it's handy. Like I said, I use it for breakaway torque on axles. That's why I use it. It's no sense of, you know, busting out a digital. This works just fine. And again, with the ball end socket, it's great. You can get in there, you get everything tight and proper, because you got to get on kind of goofy angles sometimes with some of these bolts, but like I said, it works good. You don't have to play around. Get a good quality one because the tips can break. You don't want to break a tip off in those cheaper ones just because they're really hard to get out then once they're broke off inside the head. So there you go. Typically the super long reach one you can get right across without no extension. And just make sure you get these. It goes faster when you have them run up all the way tight at first, obviously, because it doesn't ratchet. And here you go. It'll do it. So that just kind of shows you how to throw it. I mean, obviously I have to do this side, which I'll do later. But I just wanted to show you one side so you understand the torquing process. Other than that, that pretty much builds the top half of the manifold. I will get back on when we do the throttle body and the TPS setting and all that stuff and the bracketry stuff. We have to run a hose from our fuel pressure regulator to the 1/8 inch here. Obviously put our cap on, which is not a problem. I have the mark for number 1 right there, so I know that that's where it goes. That's where the cap goes. And you basically just tighten that down. That way that's in place when you route your little vacuum line over, so you have all the stuff that's in your way there, so you know how to route it. So pretty much that's it. That's how you mount the plenum and the runners to the base. All right, we are going to finish the top half of this manifold, first TPI. We're going to install the throttle body. We're going to install the TPI plate, and we're going to install throttle cable bracket. Go over this cut to fit low car cable. We're going to also install the throttle position sensor and bracket. Okay, so you see I have this front hole plugged on the bottom of the throttle body because that's for a breather, which we don't use in this application. This is for your PCV. IAC is already installed. You just need to make sure you use the right tool for this because you will break these if you try to use them vice grips or what have you. It's an 1.25 inch wrench or socket. Wrench works best. Try to get the proper one. Borrow it from a buddy if you don't have one. All right, so I'm going to plug this in. Get going on that. Plug the PCV line in. Grab a gasket here. Get these all started by hand. Driver's front upper gets the spring bracket. You want this perpendicular with the plenum when it's in place. So basically the point up in the air. I know it's kind of hard to see the video, but it's basically the straight edge is straight with the side of the plenum. Again, I try to leave all these loose just so you have a little bit of wiggle room while you're trying to get these bolts in, which we are going to torque to 132 inch-pounds. You can use just a ratchet and a 1/4 Allen, socket, and tighten it as pretty much as tight as you can tighten it. Is close, but to be proper, we'll give you a torque spec. That way you have it. We'll be using our inch-pound wrench again. We'll be setting this dial to about 132, 140, somewhere in there. We zero the orange. And I do this in a diagonal pattern, so this lower passenger will go first. And I'm using a wobble quarter, so I have a little extended reach for those lower ones. Okay, we got that all done. We are going to go ahead and do the throttle position sensor now. Like I said, I already built it. That's how I do it. The fast TPSs only have straight through holes. Corvettes, Trans Ams will be adjustable here typically, so you can set this at 0.65 to 0.5 at idle. You just basically twist it. In this case, we set it through the handheld with the TPS calibration, which is basically just full open throttle and let off for the easy systems. Fast is good for that. It's okay if you get an aftermarket TPS. It has a little bump here. If it gets in the way and it makes this thing sit too tight against the shaft, you can grind it down a little bit. There's a lot of different variations of design. It's okay if it rides on the shaft tight because it moves with the throttle shaft anyway. It's permanently connected to it with this lever, so it won't bind. I know some people think it will bind because it's touching the screw, but it doesn't. It goes with the shaft. They have to go together, so that's not to worry. This lever here needs to go on top of the TPS lever on the side of the throttle body that's pointing back. So we'll go ahead and just mount this up real quick. We're using our little 1/4 inch bolt. Like I said, just make sure that lever's on top. And another wobble T-handle. These things are worth their weight in gold when you're doing an installation. Basically, just tighten that as tight as you can. Like I said, it may look close here, but it's okay because as you can see, it follows the shaft anyway, so it's okay. So the TPS is connected, the IC is connected, PCV is connected. Now we will go ahead and put the return spring on. Basically, we just clip it in the hole. This all comes pre-assembled for you guys already anyway, so it's all set. And you can see it doesn't interfere. It looks like it does. It just touches off on the bottom, but it's not going to stop the throttle from actuating or getting stuck. So you're good there. All right, we're going to do the TPI plate. This gasket will come to you with a bump. Basically, just take some side cutters. Just snip that off. So it's flat. That way it doesn't interfere with the fuel rail. Now when you put the TPI plate on, you have to remember that this is set up for a cross threaded hole this way and this way. So there's 2 different size screws. You can see one is longer than the other. The short ones will go to the front because you don't want them to be too long because they will jam into the throttle body screws. And then you'll cross thread or gall those or jam them up, and then you won't be able to get them out, and then you screw up the plenum. It's not a good scenario, so pay attention to the length. So if you get into that, you know what's going on. With this cable bracket, this is a low car cut to fit, like I was saying. It comes with this piece. Basically on our bracket with the squares, I just use a 3/8 stainless washer on either side. Doesn't look bad, works fine. In the end of the day, when you're done, you're going to be cutting this to fit to your length. So you see how that goes into there. That goes into that sleeve. So what's got to happen is when we get this length determined after we mount this and get all the throttle body connected, we can cut this back and then it'll be proper. So obviously I put that piece on already. It's kind of nice to do as much as you can outside the car before you start putting it together. And there is some adjustment here for the guys that have the plastic cables that aren't cut to fit, like stock GM. You can kind of pull this in, out, move it. There's a little bit of an angle adjustment, whatever. In this case, we don't really have to worry about that too much because we're cutting to fit anyway. So I'll just run these up by hand real quick, and then I'll torque them. Again, 132 inch-pounds. Whoop, gotta make sure those are in all the way. It's the bad thing about the wobbles. If you don't have them in the hole all the way, they will fall out on you. And this particular one is a very tight fitting wobble socket. When you get these, you want to make sure you get a good quality one too, because you don't want them things breaking off in the head of the screw. That's not good. Okay. So that'll pretty much wrap that. This is your brake booster. Sometimes it's tight in here. When you go to put this on, you put a little WD-40 on the side of it or whatever, it'll slip right in there. For example, make sure that's up there all the way. And then here you go. Now you can set your cable sheath length. Basically lay this up close to where you're at. Mark it with a Sharpie. So you can kind of give yourself a little extra room there. You can always cut it again. Now before you cut this, make sure you pull this out. This is the inner cable. Pull it out, cut this, pull it back through, leave the cable long. When you get it through and set into place, you'll cut your cable to length to the connection part. So I'll show you that. This is how Low Car sends their cables. So it's basically a set screw. So that cable will slide into here, and then you'll tighten that set screw and lock it to the end. This arm, obviously this has not been made yet, but this arm, this is the bottom where this pin will connect. This just slides right through there like that. A nut goes on there, and then your cable will connect here, like I said. Okay, you don't be afraid if your pin's a little bigger. You can drill this hole out. Some pins, you know, are the right size dimension hole, so you can actually tap this to a 1032, which is what we use, and it'll thread right in there. But we kind of just make it so you can pop these through and just nut and bolt them. It's easier that way. So that's pretty much all you got to do to connect it to the arm. Once that connection's there, you're done. If this was a trans car, automatic trans car, I'm sorry, it would be connected through this top one and go to here with a detent pin. It's just a common slide lock pin that you can get from Summit. That's not hard to do at all. This is a manual car, so we don't have to worry about that. But other than that, it pretty much wraps the connection of the bracket and the TPS bracket and the throttle cable bracket. Throttle body, TPI plate. Pretty much that's it, really. I'll make my cable cut, make the connection, put it on there, and we will go ahead and try to fire it up. We're going to mount the CDI box still, make a coil wire, and that's about it. So next video we'll be showing you probably it running, I guess, and we'll recap all the fuel lines and everything else on the end, go over everything once again, and hopefully everybody will have an idea what it takes to put one of these on. Okay, I wanted to just do a really quick overview of everything on this car. Kind of step-by-stepped it through, but I wanted to touch on some stuff real quick, redo things as far as like information that's important. This is actually the completed install with the electronics. You can see that I put the coil there. You can see the map sensors hooked up, and the vacuum line goes to the Plenum. It has to have the vacuum line. I know guys out there have called and said they never hooked it up, and that's not good. They need to have it. It'll run extremely terrible without it. All the wiring you can see is hooked up. There is the throttle position sensor properly mounted. You can see I have a cold air intake setup that I made Conveniently, this stock hose has a loop that pipe goes right through and exits. So now we have the fuel regulator mounted to the firewall. You can see the gauges. Return goes up to the OEM return right there with the fuel injection rated line. Your CDI box is mounted on a firewall for the ignition. But for the most part, you really don't see a lot of wiring like everybody would think on a fuel injection install. So anyway, there you have it. That's pretty much it. I had just set the confirmed timing. That's why my timing light's still hooked up for the fast system, and everything else is all set. We're going to get it out of the shop, take it for a test drive, and I'll do a quick video of it running.